Hello, everyone. My name is Jan Mercer-Doms. I'm the Vice President of U.S. Development at Join Moneshia. We are an ecosystem of brands for women by women, connecting women to each other and to the companies, causes, and organizations that champion equity for women professionally and personally. Today, you're with us watching our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion show brought to you each and every week. Please make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can stay caught up on all of our latest content. And join us at joinmoneshia.com to learn more too about how you can join us as we revolutionize the way in which professional women network, connect, and do business together. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined with Monisha Zueltz. Hi, Monisha, welcome.
Hi, Jan.
How are you?
I'm good. Wonderful to be with you today.
It's so great to see you. So we have the New York City, Germany connection going on this episode today. So I can't wait to hear about what's happening right now over in Germany. And it's interesting because before the show, we were talking about, of course, what else, COVID, and the way in which it's changed our world in 2020. And some of the cultural differences that have emerged in the sense of how we think about coping and overcoming and supporting each other as a collective. And Monisha, would love to hear your thoughts on what your experience has been like with COVID in Germany this year.
Yeah, absolutely, Jan. Thank you for asking. So just to make it clear for your audience, despite the fact that I've got a New York City backdrop, having been raised in New York City and feeling very close to it, this is about as close as I'm going to get to the city in the near term, right? So I have it here as my backdrop, but I'm actually broadcasting from Munich, Germany, where I moved here via Amsterdam about 6 years ago. And I'm really always looking at, with COVID, like what is going on in Germany vis-a-vis New York, especially in the US, keeping tabs on my loved ones, around the world, like many of us are. And I'm really amazed at how Germany is really kind of held up as a model for how to deal with COVID. And some people in Germany are not happy with that model because they feel like they were almost over prepared for COVID. But on the flip side of that, we've seen people really experience solidarity and come together like from the very good beginning. We do have a female leader, Angela Merkel. So, you've probably seen the press around how some countries are doing better because of that. But I would say besides being a female, she just brought people together, worked with the ministers of the different states within Germany, and without any drama, just said, guys, this is something we need to do. We need to quarantine. We need to go outside and do sports, but we need to make sure we're respectful of others. We're all in it together. And people just did it, and we still are doing it. So we haven't seen a dramatic second wave here, and we are, basically peacefully going about our business. And it doesn't really feel like COVID is here, or it has been. If you walk around outside of in grocery stores, wearing masks, people are just kind of able to move around very freely without a lot of fear. And it's been, just a time to slow down, but without, thankfully, too much drama.
So as you know, here in the United States, we have a very different perspective happening and playing out in the sense of how we're living our daily world. And it's interesting because it's, as you know, New York City and the New York area and the northeastern part of the country was hit so hard in the first part of COVID in month number 1. And now many of us are in month number 5, month number 6. And so we see spikes and ebbs and flows in different states, but largely also because this is an election year, much of the conversation around how you protect yourself has become very political. And so, what we see is that there are, more or less 2 different camps that align themselves with political parties in the sense of even things like wearing masks, right? And so it's interesting to hear your perspective of what you see happening in Germany when our perspective as a country is so vastly different right now. And, wondering, from your perspective now as an insider, be it also an outsider looking in, what has been different in the sense of that sense of belongingness and that we're all kind of in it together in Germany that you think is still missing here, that we could all learn from, from your experiences having now been, in Germany for many years?
Yeah, no, I think, well, we touched about some of this earlier, that as we were getting to know each other, that, in the German psyche, right, they don't operate from the perspective in general of one-upmanship and, trying to stick out and get ahead. It's really a culture of we're all in it together. We're trying to build a society. Just think about after World War II, what had happened, the fact that they had gotten into, being superior, right, under, a fascist Nazi regime was all about superiority, and how that led them down a path which they're now finally coming to peace with. And also realizing that that is not a road they want to go down. So this sense of like, we're all equals, we have equal rights, we have equal freedoms, but never one person over the other, always in relation to what is best for society. That really has come forward in a big way, where people are maintaining a sense of health across society, not just for themselves. And they do what's good for them, but also what's good for the rest. And this is something that's very, very clear when people go out. They're super conscientious about keeping space, wearing their mask, and they don't have to ask them twice. They just do it. They just know intuitively that that's the best thing to do. They don't need to be reminded. And they do it out of their free will. So, it's like, what causes that free will? I think it's, the culture of having been in a different place in the past and having, learned from that. I think that plays into it in a big way.
It's so interesting, the comment you made around it's your free will, because that ties into individual choices and your belief set, but your belief set in the sense of you feel like you do have those choices to make for yourself, right? For yourself as an individual, but then also for the collective good. Let's talk a bit about that, a little bit more, tease that out in the sense of, even though you're in it for the sense of our overall purpose with the overall collective, but yet then understanding for yourself, those are your choices that you're actually making for yourself.
So, a great example of this is like in my building, right? For example, people they will go out into the garden space and they will keep distance, but they will still talk to their neighbors. So I find that, people are compassionate and empathetic, that they're all alone, but they're together in a responsible way. I've been able to go for walks with my neighbors that otherwise I would have had no time, or we wouldn't have had the same schedule. So, this sense of, while we're being kind of quiet, maybe this is an opportunity for something else to emerge or happen, is something that I think in Germany people pay attention to, because while the pace of life is busy, it's not nearly as busy as the US, right? And while there is stimulation here, and great restaurants, it's mostly nature. People go to the mountains, people do river surfing. It's got to do a lot with being outside, and so that's really been the reprieve for people. Like kind of getting back into nature, being quiet, reconnecting in quiet ways with people around them, and really becoming a lot more localized. I feel like that's really on the rise here, and it may be something that actually is true in the US as well. It's an opportunity to connect with technology like we are, right? So in a way, your horizons stay really, really wide, maybe even wider than you would have thought possible. And you can come together in a very personal way. We've seen a lot of that happening. Germany, one other trend I'll talk about with Germany is that it wasn't very digital. Only 30% of business was digitized in processes, and that has been a dramatic shift. In the US and technology sector, we've been working home for years, 20 years, at least. When I was with IBM, that's completely new here. But it's not going to change, right? So now that Germany's caught up with modern, like flexible ways of working, I feel like that's going to really play into how it moves forward in giving people more flexibility. And I think that will be a good thing for a lot of parents and for women who've been in more traditional kind of roles and situations.
That's so interesting. I think that we're all learning so much in 2020. And, 30%, wow, that's remarkable. And I think that I think that change, I think everything happens for a reason. And I think here we're now experiencing so much change. and yes, it is horrific. It's frightening and scary as there's a lot of anxiety. I think that many of us are just getting over the culture shock of it. The Band-Aid's getting ripped off. And now we're like, wow, this is really going to be here for a while to stay.
Yeah.
I love what you said around things becoming much more local. I think that that's also happening here in the States as well. While we're using technologies like Skype and Zoom and WebEx to stay connected with each other, and reconnecting with people that we haven't seen in years. You and I have not seen each other, and what we were trying to guess before the show how many years it's been, and here we are, right? And so it's wonderful for things like that. I think that there's also so much research that indicates kind of the harmful sides of technology and too much engagement. And before COVID, many of us would talk about being addicted to your cell phone, right? Being addicted to the technology, and right now finding that need for balance, because for many of us, technology is the primary way by which we stay engaged and connected. But then we also know it's important to, what you said, go out and experience nature and take a step back from feeling like you need to be plugged in 24/7. Let's talk a bit about kind of that duality in the sense of the intersectionality of technology and collaboration and communication. Mm-hmm. And, you spent a large part of your career at IBM. And of course, not knowing what we all know today, but what was some of that early work that informed that intersectionality that you think is relevant for how we think about innovating in tech going forward?
Well, there's tech in two ways, right? So there's the technology we use that's now kind of around communications technology, which we all remember, when Skype was very difficult to use and the video, quality wasn't there and it wasn't nearly as ubiquitous as it is now, right? So here in Europe, we use WhatsApp, right? And that's our kind of instant messaging, free instant messaging encrypted. We can video on it right now. And so, you're instantly present for anyone whenever you want to. So now you can be choiceful about when to be on video and when not to be. And I think we're all realizing that being on video can be super delightful, but it's also incredibly engaging to the point of being potentially taxing and exhausting if it's overused as a medium. So now, this idea of going dark and being present, but going dark, using the chat to say I'm here and responding, figure out with technology, how do you show there are degrees of engagement? And so what is the right degree of engagement needed for that particular situation? And sometimes a phone call is the best because you don't have to look at the person. Really focus on what they're saying and their tone of voice. And so sometimes I find myself at IBM, we were only using telephone conferencing. I find myself wishing sometimes we were just doing telephone conferencing again, as one example. But yeah, this whole idea of the explosion of telecommuting and communication technology means that all kinds of work processes can change in terms of how they're done, where they're done from. And I think there will be a huge explosion of technology with human connection as a theme, and that intersectionality will bring all aboard all kinds of new ways of synthesizing those two elements. So, just even at Volunteer Vision, in terms of what we do, is exactly that. We call it technology enabling an optimal one-on-one human experience, right? Where it's not just for the moment, but there's accountability, right? So human beings have accountability. We have relationship. We don't just meet once. We have like a purpose, which may be collective. We have a purpose which has to do with us one-on-one. How do we facilitate that? What's the role of the company in providing that technology, data privacy, keeping people safe? How do we manage them at home, on their home devices, on their PC devices? What are the right safeguards? So these are all things that we've had to address via COVID. Zoom was a big no-go here in Europe for a lot of companies, especially in banking, right? Until they put the right security in. So we're trying to figure out like how to stay at the edge of this, but in a very iterative way, I feel. Yeah.
It's interesting because Comtech is kind of where FinTech was just a few years ago in the sense of understanding all of the things that you mentioned now that are going to be really important to keep us all very safe and sound from a cybersecurity perspective too, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, absolutely.
So you mentioned Volunteer Vision. You're the CEO of Volunteer Vision, and I want to hear more about the ultimate purpose and mission of that in the sense of ultimately, where would you like that organization to grow and scale to? And then you also have a new role as partner at Now Partners as well. So these are two very, very cool companies, two very cool roles. Talk to us a bit about, before we get to that, because your background is M&A, post-merger acquisition, venture investing, et cetera, et cetera. But then also, I love this C-suite title for you, Chief Encouragement Officer. I love that. Because there's kind of, in my mind, I kind of see like this right brain, left brain, perfect blend of what that means as a leader. So many things to talk about, but first talk to us about volunteer vision and the purpose behind that.
Wow. We could talk like all afternoon. This is amazing. I mean, so wonderful to be able to reflect also at the same time on all of our journeys as we're kind of I look at it very much as self-authoring, right? Ourselves and our narratives right now. And where are we now at COVID, but also where are we going? Where do we want to go? And so I think that's kind of, in Germany, we call it the rote Farbe, so like the red thread is really this idea of self-discovery at every stage. And yeah, I left the corporate world with my last role at post-IBM at Philips in Amsterdam, where, like you, I was commuting from Munich to Amsterdam every week. And so interesting, like I would be on the 5:30 a.m. flight, and we'd get out of the bathroom, and the women would run into the get out of the plane, women would run to the bathroom, and we'd put in our lipstick on. And I remember turning to the phone and being like, do you think the guys need to do this? And she was like, hell no. And like, this is like what we need to do, like these women warriors, like, and of course I was the only woman of color on the plane. It was all like Dutch and German men, like flying back and forth. And it was for us for so many years. I think a lot of us felt like we were the only ones, or very pioneering, or very unsupported, and just sort of like on our own, depending, of course, on the industry you're in. And if there were a lot of women, there were a different set of issues. Right. So it was always like something was like incomplete. And when I came to Volunteer Vision, I found the founders were female co-founded, male CPO. And their mission was really to, bring mentoring to companies, for companies to harness the power of mentorship, one-on-one mentorship, in a programmatic, structured way. And the reason they came to this was actually through social business, through social movement. And the diversity and inclusion kind of part of it evolved later. And where it had started prior to my coming in as sort of the D&I focused leader for the time when one of the founders was on maternity leave, was the way they had started was that they had done PhD work in corporate volunteering. And they were also at Allianz, which is the biggest global insurer, very financial services oriented. And they developed a program for financial literacy that they were giving into schools, and companies, their employees could engage in that. And it was supported by the board. And then a few years later, it was kind of cut off. And people were really upset. They were like, this is part of why our identity is working at this company, to be able to volunteer and give back. And so the founders said, well, at the same time this was happening, the refugee crisis hit Germany. In 2016, 1 million new refugees from around the world came to Germany as immigrants without knowing the language. And in Germany, there's 80 million people, German is still a very dominant language. And so they decided to found Volunteer Vision with a social impact investor who I know well. And they really came together as a team and said, like, let's build a technology that enables corporate employees to mentor refugees and youth who are in need of support, like psychological support, but also like literally pragmatic skills, like learning a language, practicing with a tandem. And then it evolved into creating more curriculum around that. So it's very interesting technology. It's like a tool. Imagine a Skype video classroom, but there's content there. And within the tool, you're discussing the content, and the mentor's talking the mentee through the content. So the corporate professional learns how to mentor, how to coach, and is retrained online, because everything's online, on how mentoring skills are different from being a nice friend or being a boss, right? Kind of a very distinct role, which was new in the German psyche, because they were quite structured in terms of that. their roles at work. And it really led to just this blend of content, different kinds of content. Then we've evolved to diversity and inclusion content and female leadership mentoring. So the suite around female leader development is around soft, hard skills, which are really now the new leadership skills for men and women. So when the men are involved with the mentoring, they're getting a window into what it's like to be in the, role in the perspective, the female perspective, but they're also learning how to engage in those conversations, and they get a lot more comfortable with the challenges that women have and their own role. They get to reflect on their own role in creating a more inclusive environment. So it's a pretty cool program, and it's one that it's getting known. We're still a small company, kind of in the landscape of things, right?
I would imagine also this is I love this organization. And I think that there's so much relevancy for the work that you're doing in so many different spaces and across so many different audiences, because we know that leaders now, going back to the point of our conversation around what are masculine traits versus what are feminine leadership traits, and the importance of us learning both sides of that table. I would imagine that the work that you're doing also helps to facilitate some of those conversations, particularly around understanding and empathy and, some of those more emotional intelligence skills that may not have been deemed to be too critical just a few years ago, but there's a heightened sense of awareness that we all need to become better at that, right? And I would imagine that the work that you do actually also inspires some of that work as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, when you're kind of there with the role of being a mentor, so serving somebody, and their world is so different from yours. Like they don't have running water. They can't get to the technology for the video call. And you had to wait 15 minutes or maybe an hour for them to get to the call. You start to realize like you're not at the center of the universe. There's some other people there as well. And they're also going through a reality at this point in time. And it's as valid and as relevant as yours, right? So I think this is a really important empathetic experience that I kind of wonder how else it would happen in the corporate world, because it has to be more than one time for you to get better at it. And also to understand the impact it's having on you. And it's a true human, connection through technology. And now we use it for empowering women as well. So in Europe, as you probably know, in the UK, for example, there's gender pay, parity, but they're also collecting the data. So there's enforcement of that. And so some of our clients realize we're not doing so well, and we would like women to be able to negotiate their salaries better. And so we have a suite of topics for women to get mentored on from within their company, from everything from negotiation skills to how to present well, what's your body language, becoming aware of that, communication skills, inclusive team building, your purpose, self-awareness. So it's really cool material that typically, doesn't happen in a mentoring where you're just going for coffee, right? And talking about your next career move, right? That we've all done, right? And it's like, we've been doing that for years. And yeah, you have like a couple of sponsors you might generate from that. But this is really kind of looking at it as a developmental opportunity for both sides.
I think that this is also part of the next evolution of DEI work in general as well, on so many different levels, from the past where many companies knew that they needed to have a CSR or a DEI initiative in place. Sometimes that meant affinity groups or employee resource groups, which one could argue further reified the silos in the sense of keeping groups of people together who looked like each other, right? Or on the flip side of that, then this new world where, wouldn't it be incredible if we actually each individually examined and assessed and did some reflection on our own socialization process before we even walk through the work door, meaning really understanding the intersectionality of our own identity and understanding of our own unearned privilege before we even get to our desk, right? Because I would imagine as leaders, those are some of the skills, going back to your example around, many refugees don't have running water, for example, and just think about the number of people worldwide who are going through tremendous hardship during this moment in time, right? And so when you think about what does it mean to be me walking into that door, walking into the meeting, or what am I coming to the table with in the sense of what preconceived notions or stereotypes am I holding that I may not even be understanding that I'm holding, right? And you see in the work that you do in the sense of, you know, how DEI will continue to evolve, like, you know, what is the next gen of DEI, given everything that we're talking about?
Yeah, my God, it's so beautiful that you were picking up on this. I think that we're moving into a world, like you said, which allows people to be that have that sense of belonging, which is relevant based on their race or their ethnicity or their culture, like through these employee resource groups, right, where you can come together. But at the same time, you still need places where you're seen and treated like an individual on a customized basis, right? This is where one-on-one mentoring came in. And you see the whole person. It's not just about what they accomplished at the end of the year or feedback on work. It's kind of broader than that. It's not through your boss, because it's someone who cares about you, but because your boss is always judging. So there's a trust challenge there. So this idea of there isn't one size fits all, I think is part of the role of DEI, is looking at, well, what is our population need, but also how can we treat them as individuals and how can they engage with our environment as individuals and get what they need? That's the corporate volunteering part. Some people say, I just want to volunteer on my own. I don't want my company to do it. Other people are super grateful that they can do this at work, that their company enables them through programs like ours to do this as part of the way the company represents their mission. And so I think DEI is really going to evolve in terms of being a voice for diversity and inclusion across their companies that goes way beyond having more women on boards. I mean, I'm a big proponent of more women on boards and board efficacy and making sure that the men actually kind of, and the hegemony takes advantage of the diversity on the board. And in Europe, by the way, board diversity is women, but it's also intercultural diversity. So we have that as a challenge here. But I think it goes way beyond that. I think we're going to see it filtering all the way down. And like you said, in terms of showing up for a meeting and knowing why you're showing up there, showing up in your workplace and knowing what it is, that voice that you need to have be heard, that's also part of this empowerment that, you know, Monisha is doing as well, is encouraging women to find their voice and to get their needs met at work and to trust that it will be met, you know, maybe not right away, but that we're on a journey and we can even come together and help create that environment that we want, that we can thrive in.
It's interesting. It's, you know, I think this year in particular, we're seeing so many different things in the Monisha ecosystem. You know that today we have watching with us men and women from around the country, if not around the world, executives, business owners, entrepreneurs. And what we're seeing, much like what we saw in 2007, 2008, either by force or by choice, people left their corporate jobs and either became an angel or a VC or launched their own entrepreneurial venture. And now, fast forward to 2020, you know, here in America, I quit counting if we have 57, 58, 59 million Americans that filed unemployment during these first 6 months of COVID. And yes, there have been some gains on the other job creation side of the table, but still it's a significant amount of people that were impacted at work, many of them women. Women were overrepresented in every industry. And so, you know, we hear from many women that, you know, they're now thinking, what's their next act, right? What's their 2.0, their 3.0, their 10.0 in the sense of how you pivot and reinvent and change. But that's, you know, that's scary for a lot of people. And so what advice do you have, you know, given the roles that you've held, and you've worked for, you know, startups, you're now also the partner at New Partners, which I want to talk about as well. But for those of us in transition, either as leaders or as individuals that are trying to really figure it out, what advice would you give to us? And I know that's a big question.
Yeah, I mean, I can wear the hat of like a few different roles as I think about we're self-authoring myself, which I realize now, having arrived, you know, in midlife. I can look back, right? Steve Jobs says you can't connect the dots looking forward, only looking back. So now that I'm looking back, I can see that, oh my God, I can start to connect these things together. And I realize there's some pieces of the chain I want to strengthen. And that resulted in me seeking certain opportunities as part of that and not knowing what the end will look like, just knowing like what is important to me as milestones of my own becoming, Michelle Obama, right? So I can sympathize like very much with being early in career and not knowing what you want to do. I was not one of those people. I actually had met a McKinsey partner when I was 16 and in India, like McKinsey, oh my God, right? So I wanted to be a McKinsey partner. And so it was so funny that I was so focused on that. I went to an all women's college and then I wanted to be a management consultant. And I was, but I ended up going to Monitor, which was bought out by Deloitte, but it was a little bit more edgy and avant-garde and smaller groups. So I realized, oh my God, I actually like intimate groups, smart people, but in small, diverse groups as opposed to like big, kind of environments. So that was something to learn. So pick up on this, learn what kind of environments do you thrive in, make you happy, make you joyful, where you feel seen and heard and where you're contributing at your home, in your personal, in your community work, at work itself, and start to bring those elements specifically into your work. And as you're learning, you're learning, but you're also contributing, and having that understanding of the feedback, which is formal and informal, and even your own self-assessment, are the nuggets for that authoring down the line. And maybe it's not the right time to leave. I had 2 kids. I was with IBM. It wasn't the time for me to leave M&A, even though it was really grueling and very demanding. I knew I had invested a lot to move into that career post business school at Wharton. So classic consultant, then went to business school, didn't know what you wanted to do, but knew I wasn't kind of an entrepreneur and so I went into corporate, didn't want to be in banking and consulting again. So went to corporate, learned a lot, but suddenly I felt like I was getting suffocated. Things were getting like too and too narrow, much of the same. Where was the personal growth? So I ended up kind of leaving that environment, going overseas for 2 years, which was great, but it's actually more of the same. You have to really be careful about changing environments as a way to kind of, it doesn't address the inner work, right? The inner insight on yourself. So it was an amazing experience, but I came back to New York and it was like, oh no, I'm not sure. And one of the most inspirational bosses I ever had left. Right. So that can be another thing for people who feel like they don't see the role models they want to have at work. They love their work, but it's like, I don't see myself becoming the next whatever it is. Then it becomes important to know, where am I going to get that inspiration? And I think that's where groups like this can be really great. Right. So not only looking at, your company as a place for that, or your department as a place for that. And then, it just kind of went from there after, Phillips, where I went from being M&A to being like, it's all about collaboration. I actually switched gears and said, I'm going to go from this very male competitive environment to collaboration. And then I realized at Phillips, we were running it like a holding company. And, to be collaborative, you had to actually be inwardly collaborative. It's like a mindset more than anything else. And so developing the skills of being able to be collaborative and not being the one that knows everything, or not rusting back into what you know, and being truly open and vulnerable was part of that journey. And then after Philip, I really wanted to do something social in a more deliberate way. And the big question was, is it possible? Can you do good and earn money at the same time, right? I mean, I think we all ask ourselves that question. And can we have an impact and run a small team? And I learned a lot from that experience as well in terms of what my strengths and weaknesses were. It's a great opportunity to have to throw yourself into something new, but it's also kind of, it can be scary. It can be like a new challenge. And then coming out of that experience, I feel like I now have a much broader platform, right? So working from corporate and finance, then working in a small social business focused on CSR and D&I now get how business is going to evolve towards sustainability, and that D&I and CSR, or engagement with society, and ESG now, as we call it, environment, social, and governance, all kind of getting behind the SDGs of the UN, that's really these are the forces that are going to propel companies forward, right? To do full cost accounting, to take environment into effect. And with now partners, I can now affect that, right? So I'm with my peers, all experts in different areas, and we do large transformation consulting, really focused on the experience of the B Corp movement, the benefit corp movement, as a way to inform how other companies can also kind of move in that direction.
I love this. Thank you for this. It's so fascinating because I think that this is, and you're right, like so many of us have asked that question, like how can we do good and make money at the same time? And I think that women haven't, it's totally stereotyping, but we often don't give ourselves permission to think about the M word, money, right? It's our expectation that we're going to be helping others, nurturing others, giving back, being a part of charitable causes. And often charitable causes have meant time and money. And alongside with the fact that, you know, when we think about traditional women's empowerment movements, that's often meant women supporting each other, women mentoring and sponsoring each other. And that can be a blessing, but it can also be a burden if we're expected to solve the world's gender problem, right? And so at Monisha, we talk a lot about the importance of bringing men into the conversations and not just bringing them into the conversations, but ensuring that they're a vital part of the solution, because that's still who really controls the resources in our country in the sense of money, power, job opportunities, board seats, et cetera, et cetera. And do you see that in the work that you've done as well, in the sense of ensuring that, number one, we're not creating more work for women in assuming it's their responsibility to solve the gender problem when we didn't create the gender problem?
Absolutely, we didn't, right? And now we're rising. We're rising occasion. And it's our time to rise. I think, you know, there's probably never been a better time to embrace our femininity, the way we communicate, and engage on that basis, I guess is what I would say. But there is, I'm not sure it can happen overnight for ourselves, right? I think we do need spaces like this to reflect. We need to come together as women to reflect on who we are individually, but also being channeled through being a woman, right? I mean, I don't believe our souls are genderized. I think you're just, you know, you're you and you're unique, right? Regardless of your gender. And that spirit coming through, and then meeting the other person on the side of the table, like fully embracing who you are, is what I think will make the difference. It's what it does in these interactions with people you don't know, and it can at work too, right? And I was like a shrunken flower, you know, and the research shows that like when you're not optimistic and happy, you actually make worse decisions. So you're not going to perform as well at work if you're not feeling like you're able to be like an open flower, right? So important that we self-care, nurture, but also feel like we deserve to be able to do that and be that. And that I think when we show up that way, it will show, right? Because we're not blaming anyone. We're just saying like, this is who I am, here I am, and we're listening. We don't have to know everything. It's actually a lot less pressure too.
You know, it's also dismantling the imposter syndrome. And we talk about this a lot in the sense of, you know, thinking that we're not deserving, thinking that we have to be 100% spot on, perfect, educated, knowledgeable, experienced in whatever that is, versus taking a risk and using, you know, moments in time like COVID to see that as an opportunity to actually start to learn how to take some risks differently. You know, it's interesting. We did a workshop a couple weeks ago with a woman who is a change expert, and she talked about two different types of change. There's and what makes a change expert a change expert. Like, who are the types of people that thrive under situations of extreme change? And two different types. One type was a person who thrived so well under change, but only did so when the change was like, you know, a millimeter from your nose, right? Like it's there, you have to face it, you can't turn back. You thrive in that moment in time because it's the fight or flight syndrome almost. And then there are other people who thrive under change because they go out and create that change for themselves. They don't wait to be responsive to it, but they actually see an opportunity, see the white space, and go out and seize it. And I thought that was so well articulated, because often when we think about change, we just think about change in totality, but we don't separate the reactive change from the proactive change. And I think right now is a different time for leaders to really think about, and individuals, as we lead our families and lead our communities and lead in, you know, creating a larger social, having a larger social impact. Like, what is that change you want to create?
Yeah. Yes, I love that. I completely agree. And I think as women, also in negotiation, we're known for doing much better and being much better performing negotiators than actually men, because we always negotiate on behalf of the whole, right? Like, what is the best for my not just my client, but my client, my company. Same way, we make decisions very often taking our kids into account, our spouse into account, our parents into account. So, so when you think about like what you just said in terms of being a protagonist, you need to ask the question to oneself as well. What am I being a protagonist for? You know, if I'm create a world which is more kind, which is more unified, embraces diversity, but yet we're all on the same page, we all have the same mission together. You can be a protagonist in creating that. If that's not your environment today, there's no one stopping you from creating that if that's your vision. So having a strong vision to then create the change towards, right, proactively, I think is also a very important element of being successful in that quest.
Absolutely. I want to go back for a second and talk more about the M word again, money, and really the importance of linking budgets to purpose and sustainability and people. And how will that continue to shift and evolve as companies think about not just having CSR and DEI initiatives as initiatives, but really integrating them into their business models? And what innovation do you see happening in that space?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, in Europe right now, we have, they're trying to preserve jobs. So from a corporate standpoint, I can tell you that a lot of employees are going on furlough, right? So paid time off as a way to preserve jobs. And, you know, my husband works for a very large company. There's like mandatory Fridays off, right? Some of them had to take pay cuts. In Germany, you can't change the labor laws. They're very protective. So you have to take time off if you're going to give somebody a volunteer, if someone's going to volunteer for a pay cut or jobs, people have time off now. I think that time will be recovered by companies to say, like, maybe in the future you will work less, but we encourage you and we'll create programs and opportunities, you to help us design them for you to engage around things that really drive your values. And I think that's a great win-win-win when companies start to embrace that way of thinking and doing things.
You know, it's interesting, the word you were just mentioned, values, because I often, within the corporate context, position values in the sense of mission, vision, values. And those are great things to have, great words, great sentences, great phrases to have on a website, to have, you know, as a part of your, you know, your overall company art. But how can we, as customers, clients, end users, investors and other stakeholders actually work together to hold companies more responsible and more committed to actually ensuring that a company's mission, vision, values just aren't the nice things that they include on a website, but actually things that are like lived through the employee experience, or lived through the client experience, or lived through the way in which they, you know, they re-engineer products or processes or technologies or whatever you have it be.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, I think we've never, as consumers, had more of a voice with our wallet and our purchasing power. So this rise of the conscious consumer, this idea that your money, where you spend it, matters. So people are buying less. People realize they don't need as much during COVID, that they can live on less and be happy. And so also with the rise of, you know, eating well and local and not having CO2 emissions. I mean, we just heard about the 5,000 cows that like sank into the sea. I don't know if you read about that, but like, does it really make sense in a world now to, you know, be transporting, animals with uncertain weather conditions like that across the world? Like, maybe we should be eating and growing locally. Maybe there are policies that will make that more easy and friendly, farmers markets. So eating well, eating local, and deciding to put your money there is going to be a big wake up call for all of food and retail industry and chains. And we're realizing that our global supply chains don't work and are broken. And so now is the time for that vacuum to be filled with these local solutions. And consumers are totally driving that change. Companies don't change that fast. You know, it hurts them in the wallet if you're not spending with them. And if you're spending in places that align to your values, then they're going to be the winners in all of this. And that's what's happening in the stock market too, by the way. The companies that are at the leading edge of ESG got $1 trillion extra funding in COVID times. That's $1 trillion out of 43 trillion invested. That's all the inflow went into ESG sustainable investing. So you're actually seeing the impact of that.
It's incredible to me that, and this happened pre-COVID, but when you think about the ESG funds that have outperformed the S&P 500, and the acknowledgement now finally that I think for those of us who are engaged in SRI, social impact investing, through the ESG lens, it's a great time for people in financial services because now they have an opportunity to be much stronger advocates for ESG funds, as opposed to just waiting for clients to come demand that from them, but actually to be on the forefront of educating their communities too, themselves.
Yes, and they're trying, and guess what? They're finding the Generation Z and millennials much more receptive than, so I think there will be a generational shift happening as well around this in terms of where we see the watershed in the shift. And we just hope it's going to come fast enough, right?
Absolutely. So now we've hit the time in our program and for our fast round of questions, which are going to be incredibly fun. And this is what our producer David Rick refers to as his favorite part of the show. All right. If you could describe 2020 in three words or less, how would you describe it?
Hope, renewal, opportunity.
It's beautiful. I love that. What advice would you have to tell your 85-year-old self today?
I hope I keep going based on where I am right now. And I'm still doing that at 85. So learning new things, trying new things, learning about myself, and hanging around with amazing, smart, driven, diverse women as my posse to support that process.
It's beautiful. I love that. I absolutely love that. And what has COVID taught you about taking risks, in the sense of what's maybe one or two new things that you've tried during 2020 that weren't a part of your world in the past?
Yeah, not to fill my time up with being busy. I mean, to really embrace the quietude, to ignore the voice that says, you weren't very productive today, which was there really loud for a while, but it seems to have gone away now. So just keep sticking with it, like that self-compassionate voice, that giving yourself a break, that knowing that I'm enough. I'm enough. I don't need to prove myself. I'm special. I'm noble. I've been born and created noble. Good.
It's great advice. I love that. This is a perfect way to end an incredible episode. Monisha, thank you so much for being with us today. And we'd love to have you back because I know that, as all things related to DEI and social impact investing and ESG and all the various ways in which we're all working to make not to sound cliche, but to make the planet a better place, you're the perfect person to have this conversation with.
Well, I need a perfect person to have it with. I mean, I couldn't have been more wowed out than being on Oprah. I mean, you're seriously. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Monisha. Thank you. We'll see you soon.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for watching us today. And please make sure to check out our YouTube channel. Again, subscribe for all of our latest content, and make sure to visit us at joinmeisha.com, where you too can become a part of how we revolutionize how professional women connect, engage, and do business together. Have a great day, everyone. See you soon.